The artists Christo and Jean-Claude installed 7,503 gates covering 23 miles of path in New York City in the winter of 2005. I was living there, and I wonder if anybody else was there or took a trip there to see that. Does anybody know what I'm referring to? So, evoking the Japanese torii gates that are placed at the entrance of Shinto shrines, the world had exactly 16 days to experience it before it was nothing more than a beautiful memory of a moment in time. Artists like Andy Goldsworthy craft art from natural and found materials, allowing wind and rain and snow and other chance factors to manipulate the piece and eventually destroy it. Using stones, twigs, mud, icicles, leaves, flowers, whatever he finds out in nature, several of my early childhood educator friends love using these concepts to help children understand that seasons change, weather and wildlife changes, things come and they go. Existing in many forms, from sculpture to visual art to music performances to graffiti art, as long as the work is short-lived and perishable, it is ephemeral art. Sand mandalas are a great example of this. They're created to ultimately be ritualistically destroyed. Made from sand, these mandalas symbolize impermanence and the Buddhist belief that death is not the end, and that one's essence will always return to the elements. After what often takes several weeks of multiple people working together to carefully lay down the sand to create these intricate designs, the sand is collected in a jar, wrapped in silk, and taken to a river where it is returned back to nature to bless nature. Despite its language and destructive imagery, today's passage from Luke is ultimately a message of hope, a blessing in the midst of what might be heard as a message of fear. It's a reminder to us that the point is not preservation. Power is not permanence. Change and time. Change and time, there could be a whole sermon about change and time and what it is and how we experience it, but they're linked, they're inseparable. Changes take time, they're located and ordered in time, and they're separated by time. So time is a powerful force, and our relationship to it, how we understand it, it transforms our preferences, shapes our values, and alters our personalities. The only permanence is impermanence. The one constant in our life is change. And yet, what's the one thing we spend our whole lives fighting? Today's scripture reading takes us to Jerusalem. Jesus has had conflict with the temple authorities, the legal authorities, and the chapter begins with Jesus observing the comings and goings of people making their financial contributions to the temple. He was in conflict with all the structures of power, and whether he knew it or not, Jesus, like many of us, was on borrowed time. The chief priests and legal experts were pretty fed up, and they were about to start coming to look after ways to kill him. So he sees a poor widow put 2 small copper coins in the temple treasury. This comes to us in the first four verses of this chapter. And he comments to them that though her contribution is small in comparison with the magnificent gifts of the wealthy, because she has given these coins out of her hopeless poverty, that's his word, hopeless poverty, it is more significant than anybody else because she gives from what she lacks rather than from her abundance. She gives the meal she cannot afford to give, not the leftovers once she's sated. And she's giving this into the treasury of a temple that took 80 years to refurbish, to expand, that spared no expense in the process, and ultimately became one of the great marvels of the ancient world. So as Jesus overhears people talking and coming and going, they're discussing how wonderful this temple is, he gives this teaching, suggesting that the days are coming where not one stone of this incredible, grand symbol, statement to wonder and affluence, that not one stone will be remaining. By the time Luke's gospel was written, 50 to 60 years after Jesus' death and resurrection, Jerusalem had been razed to the ground by Rome. So when we try to wrap our minds, right, when we talk about something that's just a thought exercise, none of us have seen it, out of our kind of context, we have to remember how the original recipients of the gospel, or those receiving this teaching in real time, must have felt. So I wonder if the 9/11 terrorist attacks might be a good example for us of the level of shock, of sadness, of fear, of anger that must have gripped everyone. Death, destruction, great symbols of our security and our power were demolished. 21 years ago, it was hard not to have a sense of hopelessness. I imagine the feeling was probably very similar on December 7th. And I have to imagine many times in history in the past, it's felt the same. What had been destroyed, what is and always will be, for us is the task to temper our expectations, stand firm, and stay the course. To endure. And we know that endurance often is connected with suffering. Now, this text has been interpreted to support all kinds of things, but I wonder if we can presume that Jesus meant exactly what he said, that everything dies, that nothing is permanent. We give birth to creatures who die, and we are all ephemeral. Everyone in this room will die. Theologian Christian Piatt observes that we make a false correlation between our faithfulness and the lifespan of a thing. We assume if it's good, it should last. That if we're good, we should last. And if we're honest, we should get what we want. But Jesus is speaking to an aspect of our lives that exists beyond our circumstances. He has to. Because as New Testament scholar Fred Craddock points out to us, if you look in your bulletin, verses 16 and 17 make verse 18 difficult, creating what seems to be a bit of a contradiction. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but not a hair on your head will perish. Verse 18, but a hair of your head will perish, is not fulfilled in Acts, right? In fact, disciples did suffer death. So verse 18 is either a misplaced saying, or it may mean that persecutors can kill in a physical sense, but in a far more important way, disciples will be kept safe. In any case, faithfulness and endurance under threat, under arrest, under penalty of death, are qualities of disciples during this time of witnessing. God protects us from nothing, yet sustains us in all things. Protects us from nothing, yet sustains us in all things. That's hard to hear. That's hard to accept in the moment. We prefer status quo. Status quo is safe, it's good, it's predictable, I can plan on it. What, when, how? Change, it's uninvited, it's unwelcome, it's unwanted. When things change in our lives, when circumstances shift, we don't ask ourselves, what is God doing here? How is God leading me, walking with me in this? How is something new being created here? How do I need to change to meet this moment? We're so busy rushing to restack the stones of what was, clinging to what we were, that we don't see the opportunity to take the stones and build something new, to become something new, to stop, to listen, to ask ourselves in the face of whatever has happened, is this the darkness of the tomb, or could this be the darkness of the womb? How is God calling me? What is God calling me exactly to do here? And I think most importantly, for many of us in very dark moments, will I go on? Jesus isn't saying that everything happens for a reason. He's not suggesting that every trial or every tragedy is a character test. But he is asking us, will you go on? When this temple, whatever this thing is that you've poured all of yourself into, that you love the most, when the bottom of the boat falls out, when the thing that gives you power, safety, certainty, when it crumbles and there's nothing left, will you go on? Will you rise? He's declaring that faith is the mark of discipleship because there is still work to be done. There's always work to be done. Will you go on? Will you endure? He's inviting us to ask ourselves, what are the beautiful gemstones that adorn our lives? Those things that give us confidence, hope, certainty, faith, that all is well, that all will be well. And he's cautioning us to remember, to bear in mind that those things were never supposed to last. Our hope was never to be found in those things. Ecclesiastes tells us that to everything there's a season, there's a time and a purpose, so our expectation of permanence is misplaced. Temples don't last means that we make something new from what was, that despite the seeming signs of disaster, of what surely must be the end, God is still in charge and God is still faithful. We can look back on what was while going forward. We can go on. With war raging and more war brewing, widespread violence, political polarization, the woes of Jesus' warning are as real now as they've always been. In fact, in the face of all of these things, Jesus is saying, endure, stay faithful, stay the course. No matter what falls apart, Christ remains. These should be words of comfort for those who feel like the world is ending. Horatio Spafford wrote the famous hymn, "It Is Well With My Soul," after several incredibly traumatic, devastating events in his life. He lost his 4-year-old son. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 ruined him financially. And so planning to travel abroad with D.L. Moody to do some evangelism abroad, he sent his family ahead, staying home to finish up some business. While crossing the Atlantic Ocean, the ship sank. His 4 children, his 4 daughters died. His wife was the lone survivor of the family, and she had to send him a telegram that said, "Survived alone, ... While traveling to meet her, he was inspired to write the lyrics to that hymn as his ship passed the same spot where his daughters lost their lives. Jesus is describing a defiant hope, hope that lasts and endures, that we can build our faith on, hope that can say, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well. It is well with my soul. I think that's the kind of hope, the kind of hope we're to cleave close to, a hope that allows us, that enables us to embrace mystery, change, loss, grief, death, and all the endless ephemeralness of our lives, knowing that it will one day be over. Not to future catastrophize, but to enable us to love and live and do what we can now while we can, to celebrate the perfect moments knowing they won't be there forever, not expecting them to be, to ask, how can I be faithful with what I will one day lose? How can I love best what I will one day lose? Can I worry less? Can I do the thing I've been putting off? Get clear on what really matters to me? Can I leave behind what's heavy and embrace whatever time we have? This message helps us refocus on the goal of now, of our time here in our earthly pilgrimage, to know, to love, and to serve God in this life, giving us the courage to see things exactly as they are and to trust that God remains present with us in the world, in our lives, even when we think surely God cannot be in this. To be here now, to build something new from what was, with God's help. This is a message for hope in times of struggle. Emily Dickinson titled hope "The Thing with Feathers." I kind of prefer David Orr's metaphor that hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. Wendell Berry has a poem that embodies this kind of defiant, determined hope. In the dark of the moon, in flying snow, in the dead of winter, war spreading, families dying, the world in danger, I walk the rocky hillside sowing clover. Done in the darkest times, when the signs indicate that all is lost, hope is the still small voice that says, there is work to be done. There is more. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, Anne Frank journaled, "Where there's hope, there's life. It fills us with fresh courage and makes us strong again." She wrote realistically about her fears, hardships, suffering still to come. But she hoped, and she hoped, certain that death is not the end because there is a greater power at work. May we too persevere through all things with a hope that endures, a hope that sustains, and ultimately, a hope that saves. In this hope may we live, and in this hope may we die. Amen.